Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Estudar Direito pelo Mundo, where I get the chance to interview people who've studied abroad, especially lawyers, people who are practicing abroad. And today I have the honor to be inviting Adriana Lacombe Coiro, who is a Harvard graduate, and she'll be speaking with us about her LL.M experience, as well as some about the application process and her work as a consultant helping people in their application. So thank you so much for joining us today. It's a great honor to host you at the podcast. And to get our conversation started, Adriana, would you introduce yourself to our listeners?
Yeah, of course. First, thank you so much for having me here. It's I've been following your account and your things, and it's amazing this work that you've been doing. All right, so I'm from Brazil. I went to law school in Rio de Janeiro at FGV Direito Rio, FGV Law School. During my law school, I was an exchange student at Harvard Law for one semester. Then after I graduated, I worked in my own law school a little bit for a few years as a researcher, and then went on to work as a law clerk, mostly with administrative law and public law. And then from then, I knew that I wanted to kind of change my career a little bit, didn't know exactly what I wanted to do, but I knew that I'd always wanted to do an LLM. So that was one of the reasons that I applied for the LLM, was to kind of try to figure out what my next step was going to be. And little did I know that my next step would be in the actual application process for the LLM. So I applied for a few law schools, Harvard, Stanford, Berkeley, and NYU Columbia, and was really lucky to be admitted to these programs. And then I got the Lemann Fellowship at Harvard and went to do my LLM there. Had to postpone my plans because of the pandemic. And then in the meantime, I started helping other people with their applications, and then discovered that this was a path that I really enjoy, that it kind of combined passions that I had of knowing different people, knowing their stories, and helping them kind of understand what the application process wants. So I did my LM kind of focusing a little bit on storytelling and human rights, which was an area that I was interested in, and equality and diversity. Graduated last year, and then I've been working with LLM applications and applications in general for a few years now.
Wow, that's fantastic. Well, I guess that already kind of covers a little bit of how you decided to study an LLM abroad. That's fantastic. And can you tell us a little more about your experience in Harvard? You mentioned you were there as an undergrad student. Is that right? Did you always have the go to study there? How did that happen?
Yeah, kind of. I mean, Harvard was always something that I wanted to do. It was actually one of the reasons why I picked my law school in particular, was that going in, I knew that they were one of the only law schools in Brazil that had an exchange program with Harvard. So that helped me pick them. And then when I was in my fourth year of law school in Brazil, so in my eighth semester, I had a chance to apply for this exchange program. And then I was at Harvard for one semester, studying the same classes that LLM students or JD students can take. But instead of it being for 1 year, it was only for 6 months. And I was a little bit younger than my LLM colleagues at that time. But it was a great experience. And with it, I knew that I wanted to go back to the US to have a longer education experience there. So that was also one of the reasons that led me to apply for an LLM almost, when I say 10 years later, which is, it's kind of a long time, but it was the time to kind of mature this plan and understand better what I wanted to do, which areas I wanted to focus my LLM on.
Wow, that's fantastic. Well, thank you so much for sharing that. That's really nice, And well, maybe kind of a question here. What did you see different from your exchange 10 years back in Harvard now? Did you feel a little bit of a difference going back to campus? How was that?
That's a great question. I feel that well, first it was great to go back and to see the places that I was familiar with, and to now be part of this group that I had when I went as an exchange student. I really looked up to the LLM students, and admire what they had done, and they seemed like this kind of amazing group that I couldn't reach. So it was incredible to be admitted to the LLM program years after that. The school had physically changed, so there was a whole new building from the time that I was there. But other than that, I feel like it was the same environment with great things and not so great things. So I feel that there's often kind of an idealized version of what the experience of studying abroad can be. And because I had done the exchange program, I had kind of my feet on the ground on what was expecting me. So I knew, for example, that I would get the chance to meet amazing people, but I also knew that I had to be very careful in selecting the professors and the classes that I was going to take, because on the area that I was interested in, for example, I wanted to have more of an international perspective, and I wanted to be with professors who would respect or who would value different views of the law and international views and views from different countries. And that is not necessarily the case for every professor or for every class or every course. And I knew that because of my experience at the exchange program, for example. So that, I think, for example, that made me better at picking my classes when I went as an LM student, because I knew I wanted I had to be careful in choosing professors who I really wanted to study with. Another thing, I think that I didn't underestimate the amount of work that it was going to take. So it's the LM program, or the classes in the US in general. I feel like law schools have a lot of reading. The time when you look, at least coming from Brazil, when you have, I don't know, 7, 8, you take 7 or 8 courses every semester, and you're usually only at the school for part of like half, either the morning or the night or the nighttime. But you have a lot of free time. And then you go to the United States and you look at the number of credits you can take, and then you go like, oh, but I can only take 3 courses, but I'm used to taking so much more. And I heard that from a lot of my LM colleagues, for example. And I knew that like, you can only take 3 classes because the amount of work that you're going to have to do for these 3 classes at home, the amount of reading you're going to have to do, the papers you're going to have to write, are going to fill up your time. So I knew not to overcommit, at least in my first semester. For the second one, I wanted to do everything because it was my last semester there. So I might have done a little bit too much, but it was still totally worth it. I got a chance to do amazing things during the LLM program.
Oh, wow. That's fantastic. Well, taking that into consideration, could you comment about maybe one of your favorite classes then?
Yeah, of course. So I did different things during the program. So not only courses, and that's something that I would strongly recommend for people looking into LM courses, is that your experience is not limited to what you're doing inside the classes. So in terms of classes specifically, so I had a chance of study both at the exchange program actually and at the LM with a professor who's very highly regarded in the field of gender law. She's called Catherine McKinnon, and she has very strong views on, but she is a reference and a powerhouse in this field, and it was a privilege to study with her. Even though, for example, I don't necessarily agree with all of her views, but to hear them from her and to hear her explain it was amazing. I also had a chance to do a clinic, which a lot of law schools have. So at Harvard, the clinics are kind of a practical experience. And the way they work at Harvard is that you combine a class with hours of practical experience. So in my case, kind of in Brazil, we would call a escritório modelo in a way, but it works very differently. It's a lot more intense. You have a lot more help in your work, and it's a lot more targeted at a specific area. So for me, the clinic that I took was the Immigration and Refugee Clinic. I had never worked with immigration before. I knew very little about immigration in Brazil. I honestly think that one of the reasons they accepted me was that I spoke Portuguese, and there's a lot of Brazilian immigrants in the US at the moment needing help, and not a lot of people speak Spanish, not that many people speak Portuguese. But so it was a totally different field. So we had a seminar, so class once a week on immigration and on the topic, so on the law of it, but also on the skills that are necessary to work as an immigration lawyer. So you're going to be dealing with people who go through very traumatic experiences. You're going to be dealing with different kinds of things, different kinds of people. So the skills you need to do that, which would go beyond understanding the law. And then I had worked with actual clients for something between 20 to 30 hours a week. So I had a specific client, for example, from Brazil. I had a different client from Haiti. They were in their processes seeking refuge in the United States, and I got to interview them. I had meetings with my Brazilian client twice, maybe 3 times a week at one point, and it was just me and my other colleague who was an American JD student. So it was a very intensive experience of what it is like to be an immigration lawyer in reality. And I had a supervisor who was amazing, who was closely following our work, and we had meetings every week, and she gave us feedback. So it was a very, very practical experience, and it got me, I feel, to a different level in my writing and my communication with clients, even in how secure I felt of working with this area, for example, or conducting a meeting with someone who I'd never met, who had gone through very difficult experiences. And it was also very rewarding to be doing something practical. So that was an amazing experience, kind of related to class, but not exactly in class. And lastly, if I can add one more thing, I also got the chance to work as a research assistant, which was also a different experience outside of class, which was great. I was working for a Brazilian professor from the Harvard Education School, actually, Adriana Lacombe. She's also an amazing professor who has her career, and her work is really amazing. And she immigration, so I knew that she existed. I knew she was amazing. I had a chance to meet her at an organization at an event for Brazilian students, and then kind of went up to her and introduced myself and said, like, oh, I really like your work. If there's ever any chance of an opportunity of working with you. And I was lucky that she actually needed a research assistant. So that worked out. So I think that was also an experience that I enjoyed. That was really great.
Wow, that's fantastic. Yeah, it's lovely to hear all the story of how, I don't know, you prepared in a way to get to Harvard, and you went there, enjoyed it the best way possible. You also mentioned you were approved for several of the schools, right? You got admitted into several of them, but as you said, Harvard was already a long plan. Well, and now your career, your next step is helping people with their applications. So could you tell us a little bit about your consulting services for future LLM applicants, and maybe what are the main difficulties you're seeing people struggle with when they are doing their application?
Yeah, of course. So first I'll say that I was really lucky to be admitted to all of these programs, but it wasn't like an obvious choice. I knew all the amazing things that Harvard had to offer, but I also knew that for example, at Stanford, the skills program that I applied to had a very specific focus on research, and so if I had gone there, I would have developed this area maybe more. So it wasn't. I feel like all the schools have different and amazing things to offer, and it's really important to look beyond the name of the university and to understand what is the right fit for you and what's the profile that you're looking for. In the end, I knew that I didn't want to live in a city as big as New York at that point, which is ironic because I live close to it now. But so I wanted kind of a smaller place, but I also wanted a bigger group of people exactly because I was still figuring out my next step. The program at Stanford was smaller, and it felt like it would, for kind of networking opportunities, I wanted to meet people from different areas at Harvard. Allowed me to do that. And there was also a personal reason that my husband was studying at MIT at the time. So that was the thing to close the deal, I think, at the end. Putting all these things together, Harvard made sense. And I was really happy that it worked out, and it was a great experience. And then now thinking about what are the biggest difficulties people have, I would say that the first one is that we're not used to, when we're looking at Brazilian applicants at least, we're not used to the whole idea of how you're supposed to sell yourself in a way. That's a very strong part of the American culture, and that's something that you kind of grow up learning how to do in the US. So you're going to do that at a job interview. You're going to do that at your college application when you're 16 or 17. You learn, even I was working with college applicants last year at Fundação Estudar. And when you describe the extracurricular activities that you've done, for example, you're already practicing this skill of putting what you did in as little words as possible, but showing the impact, showing the numbers, being sure that your reader knows the full impact and the full extent of the great things you have done. And in Brazil, we kind of have the culture of being a little bit more modest. We don't boast as much when we're talking about what we've done. And we need to kind of break out of this pattern or this comfort zone in a way, and learn to really value the things that we've done, and learn how to tell them in a way that that an admission officer will truly understand and will value what you've done. So understanding what's expected and how you're expecting to tell your story, I think, is one of the difficulties. The other one is having people actually see the amazing things they've done in their own lives, which might sound kind of weird in the first moment. But what I mean by that is I often get people who will come to me and say, like, oh, but I haven't done anything, like my story isn't great. I haven't done anything out of the ordinary. And then when I start digging into and try to understand everything they've done and talk to them in more detail, and I send all of my clients a very extensive list of questions for them to answer about all they've done in their career, what they like, what they're interested in, why. And I don't think I've ever come across someone that I said, like, oh, yeah, they're right, they haven't done anything interesting. There's always something. We usually don't value the things we've done in our own lives, and there's always a great story to tell. People have done different sorts of amazing things, and this is one of the things that I love about this work, is getting people to see how amazing their own stories are, and kind of helping this shine through in their personal statements, for example.
Oh wow, that's fantastic. That is really something that makes a lot of sense. I can see that happening when you mentioned it. I can really understand how people don't really have, I guess, the practice of having an exercise of looking back into your career, into your life, and seeing how many amazing things we've accomplished. It's an important process, I believe, right? Even for understanding how you would fit in an academic community that definitely has a prestige and all of that. That's fantastic. Well, no, first thing, I love this exercise you mentioned. And then do you see something else that people could do, maybe like to prepare for an application for those who are studing law school or those who will apply in a couple of years?
Definitely, yeah. I think that there are different things that you can do at different stages in your life. So, for example, if you're still in law school, or if you finish law school, but you know you're going to apply in a few years, there's a few things you can do. First is you're going to have to ask for recommendation letters when you apply, for example. So making sure that you have good recommenders is something that you're going to do throughout, from law school and then when you're working. And what that means is that you want to make sure, for example, that you have at least one or two law professors who will remember you in a few years, that you do well in their tests or in their exams, but usually more than that, that you that they know you outside of class, that you do a research that you can work with them, for example, as a research assistant or at a moot court, or that they're your supervisor, or that you ask a lot of questions in class, or after class you stay on and ask the professor about topics or bring to his or her attention things that are relevant to the area. So make sure that you build a relationship with that person, because they are going to be recommending you hopefully in a few years, and the more they can say about you, the better. And same with your professional contact. So I knew, for example, a lot of when I was working at my university, I knew that I was working with people whose recommendation would be really relevant for me when I wanted to later apply for the LL.M program, and that turned out to be true. And I'm sure that was one of the reasons that helped me get into these programs, for example. Another thing that you can do is, well, keep your grades up. Grades are going to matter when you apply, which is not to say that if you don't have good grades from your law school, you shouldn't apply. And we can talk in more detail about that. There's things you can do to address that. But if you're still in law school and you can keep your grades up, I would definitely recommend that. Get involved in different things at the university. So moot courts, exchange programs, research opportunities, anything like that you can deepen your understanding of a specific area of law is something that's going to look great. And even things that aren't necessarily law related. So be involved in sports team of your university or in student government. All these things are going to show leadership, initiative, things like that. That also goes from when you finish law school. So if you can be involved in bar association committees or things that show that you're an expert, or that you're looking into represent people in your area, that you're aware of the important discussions that are happening in your field of work, publishing articles, doing voluntary work, either related to law or unrelated to law, but showing that you're aware of the community around you and that you're trying to contribute to your surroundings in some way. Those are some of the things that you can think of and I'll study English, obviously, because you're going to have to take an English test, and that's going to be so that the English test won't be a problem for you in your application year.
Wow, those are very valuable tips. I hope that those who listen to us will still have some time to keep on working on their grades and all of these initiatives. And that's so incredible. And I'm sure that as people get involved with those things, it's easier also to tell your life story, because you can base it off of some more specific cases of what you've done. You briefly mentioned something about the grades, of like encouraging people who maybe didn't reach the highest grades, and that you can address that in some way. Maybe would you be able to tell us a little bit about just in general the admissions process being so holistic and something that we're not used to in many countries? Could you tell us a little bit about this grade situation?
Yeah, of course. So I would say that it's grades do matter. I would be lying if I say that they don't. But there are different ways to, if your grades aren't great, then there's different ways to address that. And it depends on, again, like it's all dependent on your story, who you are, what you've done up until that point. So one thing, for example, and for your personal statement will be one of the places where you'll be able to address these things, and where you'll be able to kind of explain questions before they're made. So for example, we started law school in Brazil really early, right? At 16, 17. Maybe you didn't know exactly what you wanted to do at that point, but then you came across intellectual property on your fourth year and then discovered that that was your passion. And then you started it really hard and became an expert in that field. You can say that, and you can explain that you've matured over the years, or that it took you a little while to find your footing on where exactly you wanted to study. You can do a master's or a specific, like a specialization program afterwards, for example. And if your grades at your master's are significantly higher than in law school, you can also use that to say, look, this is how well I did after I knew what I wanted to study, or after I was more mature to know that this was important. Or you can say there can always be good reasons why your grades weren't that great. So maybe you were interning in a law firm that you had to work many hours a day, or you lived really far from your school, or you didn't have the necessary resources to study that hard at that point for one reason or another. There's multiple reasons for differences in grades, and addressing them and explaining them to the university is something that's going to help them understand the context. Because as you said, the application process is holistic, right? So it's looking at different things. And if you can give them context to why your grades are the way they are, then that's really helpful. And the other thing about that, when people ask me, that's a question that I get a lot, like, are my grades important or should I? And connected to that is, I've just finished law school, should I apply now? And these things are connected in a way, because if you've just finished law school, then your grades are definitely going to be really important, because that's what the school has to look at. If you've graduated a few years ago and you've had, I don't know, 4, 5, 6 years of professional experience, then you can highlight all the things that you've done after law school. And it's not at all to say that your grades won't matter, but the balance, or the amount of things that the school will be looking at in the whole scenario, the grades will be a smaller part of the package in a way, because you have other things to add. So depending on when you're applying, the grades will matter more or less, and you have more things to add to your profile, for example.
Wow, that's incredible. It really makes me just want to go through a session preparing for an LLM just to get to know my story better, you know?
Yeah, I
That's
often
fantastic.
say that application processes are a lot like therapy. Like, you have to stop and think about everything you've done in your life up until that point and where you want to go next. And it's a very, getting to like self-knowledge, I feel, is a really important part of that process, because it will help you to tell your story in the best possible way. But we usually say that you can tell the same story, and lawyers know that very well. You can tell the same story in many different ways, and a good application process is figuring out what's the best way to tell your story for those universities you want to apply to.
Wow, that's fantastic. Well, Adriana, I can't thank you enough for sharing this valuable experience with us, both for sharing your experience with at Harvard, sharing a little bit of your career, all the way in tips. Thank you so much for your willingness to talk at the podcast today. I really appreciate it. And would you be able to share us just maybe your username on Instagram, or for those who'd like to follow you? I'll definitely put the contact information in the description of this episode. But if you could just mention that real quick.
Yeah, of course. First, thank you again for inviting me, and it's really been a pleasure. So my work Instagram is alc.consultoria. So in English, ALC, which are my initials, consultoria. That might be, I won't spell that. I'll trust that it'll be in the description. And if I can add, like, I often have once a month or twice a month, I do kind of general presentations on the whole application process, answering questions, and just trying to help as many people as possible in that process. I usually have the dates on my Instagram account. So yeah, so I try to speak about each part of the application in detail, and kind of demystify a little bit the process, and give just helpful tips to everyone who's applying.
Wow, that's incredible. Well, once again, thank you so much for joining us today, and thank you all for listening, and stay tuned for the next episode.